How quickly should you just decide, oh, she burned my dinner, I'm out?
It's really about maintaining the honor of the men. Clearly, Jesus was much more on the side of divorce was not okay.
We talked at length the last time we met about biblical marriage.
We sure did.
Today, we're going to do the flip side to that of what if it doesn't work out, especially in today's day and age when people now actually marry for love. Can they divorce if it doesn't work out the way that they had hoped? A lot of people carry a lot of shame with them because the church says, no. You have to go back and look at these divorce things that's talked about in the Bible. And if it's based on all the biblical marriage, is it really relevant to us today?
Yeah, people don't talk about biblical divorces.
No.
No, they only talk about biblical marriage.
Yes. True.
Now, one of the things that we've talked about already quite a bit is your parents' divorce.
Yes.
And that impacted you a lot in your life. It had a huge impact.
Yes, and in preparing for this episode, it was interesting to step back and see how the divorce affected my father versus how it affected my mother, and the two different schools of thought, if you will. My father, who ended up becoming very conservative leaning, right wing leaning, and evangelical, really still to this day deals with the guilt and shame of not being able, to make a marriage work, even though, according to scripture, he had all the right. She was having an affair. So he has every right, but it's like that church that just drummed it into them that they cannot be divorced. Or there are some denominations, and I believe it's the Assemblies of God, that still will not, or maybe they've changed it, but it would be recently, you still couldn't be a pastor if you had been divorced.
Yeah.
As recently as like maybe 10 years ago, if not now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's still such a thing that hangs on my dad, even though he went on, he married somebody, he's been married 40 years. I mean, he's happy. My mother also is happy in her own right because her idea was, I don't want to be controlled by a man anymore, period. And so she left my father and just lived her life. And for many years as a child of a divorced family, the only child, didn't really have anybody to talk to about it. You see the shame and guilt, and you feel the shame and guilt when you're with my dad, and then you feel the freedom when you're with my mom. And it was such a weird thing to kind of like process in my brain. There's still a part of me today that feels like, I could never leave my husband. Divorce is bad. Even though now I'm like, you know what? Is it really going to send me to hell? Not that I'm going to leave my husband. Nobody freak out. I'm staying with him. But at the same time, 30 years of marriage, you have had that thought a few times. Listen, there's a few days where I'm like, you know what? And I'm sure him with me more than a couple times. But in the back of my head, it's always like, well, I can't because the church says I can't. And trying to let go of that has been interesting. And it is allowing me to see my mother in a whole new light, much braver than I. A lot of people would say, oh, well, she just gave up. A woman leaving her husband in the 1970s, late 70s, starting over is actually very brave. And it's just kind of like, okay, I'm starting to see a different side to that because, again, the church tells you that if a woman does this, if a woman does that, if a woman, they are evil. And I think there's a lot of that I had to let go of.
Yeah. Would you have preferred your parents' marriage to have stayed together? I mean, would that have been a good thing for them to have stayed together?
No. And I know that. I mean, I knew that then.
You knew it wasn't a good marriage.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably when my anxiety started. You just knew it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And they did not like each other. And my mother was not happy.
Yeah.
So and you could just feel it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm very glad. Now I can say I'm so glad they divorced.
Yeah.
I think for me, had I had siblings to help me walk through things or to walk through it as a group, I may have gotten over it sooner, but because I didn't really have anybody to process, like, what is happening? What does this mean? Why do I have to keep going to one house and have these rules and go to this house and have these rules and bounce along? I think it took me a lot longer to kind of grieve it and let go of it.
Yeah.
They should never have gotten married.
Well, it's interesting because my parents, they were married and they did not ever divorce or anything. And in our family, it was, our family doesn't divorce. There is no divorce in our family. Like
Right.
that's the whole line. And I will say I had one cousin who divorced that I can think of, you know. I'd be curious to see what her experience of it was. I'm sure she got a lot of flack for divorcing the person she divorced, you know. I think that's the only one, you know. So in our family, there was a very strong emphasis that divorce is not okay. The church says it's not okay. The Bible says it's not okay. So you don't do it. It's never an option, kind of a thing. And so I think that is the message a lot of people have gotten over time. And it's still very much the, you know, company line in many Christian churches today.
Right. And I think too, there's a positive and a negative to that. When you go into something like a commitment and saying, we are not going to divorce, it's not even on the table, well, then you don't talk about it, which again is either good or bad. If you're in a good marriage, that means you fight a little bit harder. You don't give up as quickly. You know, you look for ways to make things work. If you're in a bad marriage, however, then you're stuck. And you know, who says a woman doesn't get to be happy? You know, who says a man doesn't get to be happy in their marriage, kind of a thing. And
Well,
so then nothing's talked about.
Yeah.
You know?
And if we look at what biblical marriage was and what actual biblical marriage meant for the people involved, it's pretty horrific. And so, I mean, to be stuck with someone like that in a situation where you didn't choose it, especially for the women, sometimes for the men too. I mean, sometimes there would have been alliance, you know, would have been like, well, you have to do this or whatever for whatever reason. But I mean, it's just, you know, it's terrible. And then to have to spend the rest of your life living in that would be different. And I think also one of the things that people talk about is how now with this expectation of romantic love and, you know, constant evolving and your life partner and your best friend and all that kind of stuff, you know, there's a lot of expectations put on marriages today. There's a lot of pressure for people to have all their needs met in that primary relationship. And you know, that is more than most marriages were ever meant to be able to sustain over a lifetime. So there's a lot to unpack with the concept of divorce. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the biblical understanding of divorce. So we're going to start with the Hebrew Bible, what is often known as what used to be known as the Old Testament, and many times we call the Hebrew Bible now. There's two words in the Hebrew Bible that refer to divorce, and there's garash, and I know I'm not pronouncing it right, and shalak. And so garash, they're not sure. They think it may be a technical term linked specifically to priests and the Levites, the priestly class, that they had particular rules about divorce or no divorce and all that kind of stuff. The main word that they use is shalak, and that means to send away. So when in the last episode about marriage, to marry in Hebrew, the word means to take. And in divorce, it means to send away. But we call it divorce, and it's really just sending someone away. So, you know, it's interesting. Now,
and when we say someone, it's the woman.
It's the woman. Yes. Women let's be clear, are
Yeah.
not allowed to initiate divorce.
No.
It's not allowed. A man is allowed to. When you look at the laws in Deuteronomy, it's in the 24th chapter of Deuteronomy. A man gives a certificate of divorce to the wife, he hands it to her, and he sends her away, and then that's it. You know, because of the way the world was, that would have been economically devastating for a woman.
Yes.
Even if she didn't want to be in that marriage anymore, she would have been destitute most often. And so we can't talk about marriage or divorce without acknowledging the economic implications for women
Yes.
in all ways, because so often, you know, the property, the assets, all that kind of stuff for so many generations has all passed through the male line, and women were not even allowed often to own property or have assets. So if they were divorced by their husband, they would have been destitute, which is why there's so many things about widows and orphans. If their husband dies, you know, women would have been destitute. So that's why there's so much encouragement to take care of the widows and the orphans and make sure that you're taking care of these people who are on the margins and don't have a way to live and to
Exactly.
feed themselves.
Right.
In Deuteronomy, a man can give a certificate of divorce to his wife, hand it to her, and sends her away. So there is an option for divorce. Now, I remember when I was in seminary and I was learning about all this stuff, I was flabbergasted to learn that this was an option in the law in the Bible. Like, yeah, like there is an option for divorce, you know? And, you know, when I was growing up, it was like, no, there's no divorce. There's no divorce. And we'll talk about probably why that is. But I was just like, oh, well, there was an option. It wasn't just that somebody had to stay married forever. It was a possibility, even if it could only be initiated by the man. And I know that that can be a power play, especially in relationships that can get very contentious if there's a need for a divorce. But I do remember being really surprised to learn that, you know, divorce was even a possibility. And, you know, it just acknowledges that not all people, like your parents, are meant to be married in the first place or stay married if they do get married in the first place. So,
right. But in this case, though, too, the usually the reasons for divorce too was adultery,
yes.
but only by the woman. Which is interesting because, like, if a man during this time, if a man hasn't, because what we think of adultery is like my parents. My mother had an affair with another man while she was married to my dad. When a man of this time decides he wants to have an affair, he can have an affair all he wants.
Yes.
A married woman cannot, because that is now property laws, and that's almost, they literally called it like trespassing or property rights.
Yeah.
That's what adultery was at this time. It had nothing really to do with, you know, love or
Betrayal of trust or anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was more about this woman was taken by another man. So now she is no good to her husband. So he's going to get rid of her.
Yeah.
And hopefully the man that took her to begin with will take her into his house, even though he may have lots of different wives. He can have all the mistresses he wants. And then if we go back to what we talked about, the reason for marriages, it was alliances. So now you're in the whole, well, have you broken the alliance then that you've made with this woman's father by sending this woman away who probably was raped in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Yeah.
It's terrible. In the law, the punishment for adultery is death.
yeah.
So, I mean, these are serious things, you know, and
Yeah.
it's hard to know. Did they always?
And death just for the woman, which we see in the New Testament.
Where
Again, I always want to scream, where's the other one? It takes two to have an adulterous affair.
yes,
Why is only the woman being stoned?
And brought to Jesus
And
by
brought to
this group of
Jesus.
men. Yeah,
Which
it's so
shows you
true.
that a little bit that the laws really didn't change as much
Right.
in Jesus' time when it came to divorce.
Yeah.
Because again, it was only the woman that was brought to him
Yeah.
to be stoned because she was found in adultery.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I remember learning in seminary that I thought was also really fascinating is that local rabbis would have to sort of adjudicate things that would come up in their community. And so if something happened, the injured parties would come to their rabbis, and then the rabbi would have to decide, how do I deal with this? Like, how do we do this? So there's hundreds of years of records of rabbis dealing with all these different cases,
Right.
which to me was so liberating in a way, because to me it said, oh, so this is what the law says, but we still have to interpret the law
Yeah.
based on current realities.
Yes.
And so you have these records of rabbis making decisions about situations that had come up in their communities over the centuries, and they're making decisions based on all kinds of things. Of course they look at the law and practices and all that kind of stuff, but over time you could see that practice is shifted somewhat. And so I had always wished that we had that in our Christian tradition.
Yes.
I mourned the loss of all of that kind of tradition in Christianity. I didn't even know that I wanted to have that, but once I learned about it, I was like, wow, that is so amazing, because it says that life happens, things change. The law that was given to Moses, and that's in the Holiness Code and all of that back in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, those were laws that were given at one point, and life evolves, communities evolve, people evolve, and there could be good answers that say, yes, it is okay to divorce in certain situations. So that was, I thought, another really cool thing. So there is one passage in the Hebrew Bible, Malachi 2:16, that says God hates divorce, basically. And it's just very strong. And so many people think that that's what Jesus is quoting when he so forcefully comes out
Right.
against divorce in the New Testament, the Newer Testament. The meaning of divorce in the Christian Testament, the second, New Testament, is hotly debated. Like, there's less consensus about what anything means
Right.
in the scholarly community than most things. There's just a lot of different opinions about what's going on here and what it all means. So it's interesting.
Yeah, to your last point, they have now a group of people have come to a rabbi and said, what is your take now on divorce? Because this is what has happened. And from my understanding, they had moved from a place of, yes, you can divorce for adultery reasons, but also people were beginning to just divorce, or men, I really shouldn't say people, men were beginning to divorce just because they found their wife objectionable, which she didn't please him anymore. Read into that whatever you want. And therefore more and more divorces were happening. And so now these Pharisees show up in Matthew, 19?
Yeah.
They show up to Jesus and they're like, hey, who can divorce? What's going on here? And that's where Jesus begins to say, well, what God has brought together, no man should separate, kind of reiterating back to the whole Malachi, God hates divorce, blah, 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 blah. But then he also says that the reason that people are asking this is because their hearts have been hardened. And I love that because, I mean, again, it's an interesting, and by interesting, really want to kind of take a look at it. Jesus is not saying women should have, autonomy and women should have authority or to get a divorce. He's still kind of keeping that whole Hebrew vibe of no, it's just about adultery. That's what it is. Men need to stop hardening their hearts and just finding any little thing to move on to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the one hand, it's like, oh, but he really didn't help women a lot. I mean, kind of put it back into the whole adultery thing, which again was not for women necessarily. That was all about the men. Then he says, but those who need to hear this. Maybe you just shouldn't get married. To which you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
He does a whole thing on eunuchs, which we should do a whole thing on eunuchs.
Yes.
Whew, and ends it with whoever can hear this and take this to heart, you might want to do this. And again, he's talking to men.
Yeah.
Now he's telling men, stop getting married. If that's what you're going to do, just don't get married.
It's pretty wild.
It is.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow.
What we have to say is that what we have from what Jesus says is a very strong statement against divorce.
Yes.
Which is, I think, why so much of our tradition, the Christian tradition, says you can't divorce.
Right.
Although, there's plenty of ways that people have gotten around it over the years. I mean, there's the whole, marriage being annulled in the Catholic Church, which can happen under certain circumstances. And of course, Henry VIII just made his own church, basically.
Started a whole new religion so he could get divorced.
The church.
And feel okay with
and
himself.
made himself the head of the church.
Yes.
So, it's just really interesting how there's just lots of interesting historical situations around people not wanting to be married anymore and finding ways around it. Men.
Right. And can I just, side note, for all of the housewife fans that we have, I'm sure there's a ton. Sutton Strack from Real Housewives of Salt Lake City.
No, not Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills, yeah. How did she just get an annulment?
I don't know. They were married and have 2 kids, and now her ex-husband has gotten an annulment from the Catholic Church. I do not understand that.
I don't get it either.
They were married like 20 years.
Yeah, so I don't understand their rules at all.
I don't understand it
But
either.
okay.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing.
So feel free to just put in the comments what happened there, because we don't get it.
Yeah. So this is a piece of the context of the biblical text that we don't know about most of the time. I didn't know about it until I was reading all this stuff about divorce for this podcast episode, that everything that Jesus talks about has to be seen in light of a debate that was happening at the time of Jesus between 2 schools of thought within Judaism. And they have 2 different names. There's the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. And so the school of Shammai said that the only grounds for divorce was unchastity. And the school of Hillel basically said you could divorce for anything. And there was this big debate going on. And, apparently these things continued after that. But clearly Jesus was much more on the side of the Shammai, where divorce was not okay.
Right.
That there would be limited, if any, choices for divorce. And that is clear, in his statements that he makes.
So it seemed like everyone agreed divorce was okay and legal, but it was more of a how easy should it be?
Right.
How quickly should you just decide, oh, she burned my dinner, I'm out?
Right. Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah. So it was a given that divorce, it was still a given that divorce was an option.
Yes.
It was just what grounds for divorce could be given.
Right.
And what was a quote unquote legal reason for divorce. The other thing that I wanted to also raise is that, one of the things that with some of the sociological research and everything that's happened in the past several decades, we really have to acknowledge that the context of the Bible is coming out of an honor and shame-based culture. And so there's all of this obsession, as we've called it, with female purity and, making sure, controlling women's bodies, and the way I see it is keeping them in line and contained. And it's really about maintaining the honor of the men that they are connected to. And so if a woman shames a man, then there's all kinds of things that happen. And it's about saving face and all of this kind of stuff. When Jesus is, talking about an eye for an eye and, turn the other cheek, things like that, these are all coming out of an honor shame culture, which even today there are things called honor killings in certain countries around the world where women or girls are killed because they've sullied the honor of their father or the male that is their next of kin, whatever that is. And so we have to really be clear that this is a part of the cultural biblical context that we don't really think about as much because our world is less governed by this honor shame. It's a very binary sort of way of looking. It's like good or bad. The woman is either, honorable or not, and there's not a lot of gray area. And if women did something, then there was a responsibility on the part of the men to avenge things or, do something to the woman to make up for the fact that their honor was taken away from them, that they were shamed by other people and they lost face and all this kind of stuff. So we have to acknowledge that this is just the context. And I think you can't talk about marriage and divorce and a biblical understanding of that without acknowledging that context of honor shame culture. So then the other part that we have from the New Testament is Paul. And Paul's, your favorite person. So,
God bless him.
Yeah.
Okay.
You say that instead of bless her heart or bless his heart. It's just your version of.
Yeah. That's fair.
So what about Paul?
Well, okay. So, and I'm going to let you do the whole pseudo Paul and genuine Paul and which one is which. But my understanding is 1 Corinthians 7 is real Paul.
Yes, it is.
And when real Paul talks about marriage specifically, it's much more equal kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And he also says eventually, but if you don't need to get married, don't get married.
Yes.
So
just don't do it.
Yes. But then he does teach about divorce, and he actually brings in more things about believing and unbelieving. And again, this is where it gets interesting. Again, it's about a woman. So that kind of gives me a little bit of hope. He's telling the woman, if you're married to an unbelieving husband, pray for him, stay with him, do all of these things. But if he never wants to change, then you can go as well.
That is genuine Paul.
That is genuine Paul.
That is genuine Paul.
I'm going to say what I was taught it was meant, which is probably very different from what it actually means. But my understanding was you were never supposed to marry a person that didn't believe the same way you did. That's how I was. And I will tell you, true confessions, I did break up with a fiance because we were not equally yoked. Okay?
Okay.
And the yoke, forgive me, he was Catholic, I was Christian. So apparently that's not equally yoked in my mind when I was 20-something.
Well, even what you just said is that he was Catholic and you were Christian. I mean, that's the thing is that most evangelicals do not think that Catholics are Christians.
No, they do not.
Yeah.
And so I was told I would be unequally yoked and therefore broke it off. To be fair, I was way too young. But it just, that's the mindset that you get, that your whole marriage, you have to be on the same page, equally yoked, believing in Jesus, believing that he's coming back, believing in all the things that evangelicals say we need to believe in, even to the point, unfortunately, that, the man is the head of the household and will tell you what we believe, and we are then to believe that together. But what's funny is that when you have a woman who finds Jesus, gets saved, and then she prays for her husband, and she goes to church, he doesn't. I don't know if you ever dealt with this, but the majority of people that I dealt with in evangelical churches are women, which is so funny because women aren't allowed to teach, but it's women that carry the church and do everything. But many of those women, their husbands did not go to church. So they didn't want to leave their husband because they felt Paul said, stay. You need to stay and just keep praying for them. And it's like, oh my goodness.
Well, it's really funny because what struck me this time kind of reading this passage from 1 Corinthians was the first thing that he says. This is 1 Corinthians 7:10. To the married I give this command, not I, but God, because I think he's referring to God's law or something like that the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does separate, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and that the husband should not divorce his wife. So that's the first thing. And that's what he says God says. Then in verse 12, it switches. To the rest I say, I and not God, that if any believer or brother, the word is actually brother, but in most translations, they call it believer, which is an interesting thing. A believer and a brother are two different things to me. So that's interesting too.
Yeah.
The Greek is actually brother. So if a believer has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. And if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. Now that's interesting because it sounds like he says women have the capacity to divorce their husband.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing right there.
And we are talking like how many years after,
Paul would have been writing these in like the 50s. Approximately in the 50s of that first century. So then he says, for the unbelieving husband is made holy through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy through her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean. Again, it's that concern about children, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such a case, the brother or sister is not bound. It is to peace that God has called you. Wife, for all you know, you might save your husband. I think that's what you're talking about there, that people staying together.
Yes.
Husband, for all you know, you might save your wife. So it's a remarkable passage for someone who was not married himself.
Yes, thank you. Why are we taking marital advice from a man who didn't get married, nor did he want to? What makes him, I don't get it. And to be fair, God bless Jesus, but Jesus also, who we don't think got married. Why are we always listening to these men who don't understand and are not in anybody's position, any female position? Tell us why we shouldn't get married and what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
It just, for me, it's when somebody who has no children tells me how to raise my children. And I was like, bitch, no. You know what I mean? It's like you can sit at home and look at my kids running all over the place and tell me what I need to do, but you have not endured the last however many weeks, days with these people, and I need a break. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so here's Paul saying, listen, if you married an unbeliever, it's fine. Just pray for him. Well, what if I don't want to be with that person anymore? You're single. So why do you get to tell me how easy or hard my marriage should be when you're not even married? I used to say that all the time about Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to say because there is that evangelical mindset that, Jesus he's endured all that we have. He knows everything because he's had the same experiences, or what would they say? You know, he's been tempted the same way. I'm like, no, he never married. He wasn't tempted to kill their spouse because they wouldn't listen. You know what I mean? Like, or he had no children. He has no idea.
He has no idea the burdens.
Like, children are hard.
Yes.
And they test you and they push you.
Yeah, so do spouses.
Jesus didn't have to deal with that. Exactly.
Yeah. I was pulling out some of my books. This one is called The Historical Jesus, The Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant by John Dominic Crossan. In this passage, he's talking about Jesus's statement about divorce here. And this is the one from Matthew chapter 5, verse 31. And this is what Jesus said. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce, which I think the word is get, G-E-T. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So it was interesting because we see that as just such a negative statement about divorce. Mm-hmm. But what Crossan talks about here, and he's quoting the work of another scholar, John Kloppenberg. What a name. And John Kloppenberg points out that Jesus is concerned about the honor of the woman here and not just the honor of the man, which is interesting, which I had never put that together. Mm-hmm. I only saw this as a negative thing, like, you know, don't divorce, blah, blah, blah. It's a terrible thing. But what's interesting is that Jesus is actually pointing to, there is a concern for the position of the woman in this case. So there was sort of a little bit of a silver lining. I saw that. There is a concern for the woman and not just for the man in this situation. So I had never seen that part of the text before. And so that was a little bit of a silver lining, that Jesus was not just concerned about the male point of view relating to divorce, but also looking at what is the effect on a woman. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. So
it's nice to be seen.
Yes.
By Jesus.
I know. It is.
The plights of a woman.
I forgot to mention the words in the New Testament that are that relate to divorce is aphiemi, and then the other one is, I love this, chorizo, which I just think of chorizo, the sausage, you know.
Oh, chorizo?
Chorizo. Okay. So anyway,
I'm never going to be able to look at chorizo again.
No, you're not.
See him again. Yeah. Okay.
Religious Rejects. Subscribe accordingly.
So whoever the writer of 1 Peter is encouraging women now to act like Sarah. And it brings up fears, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's unpack that. We talked last time about Sarah and how she was pimped out by Abraham, okay?
Yes.
And then raped, obviously.
Yeah.
So what is 1 Peter's author trying to tell women here, especially when it relates to be like Sarah's daughters and in the face of fear or whatever it is? Meaning, if you're going to get pimped out, just go with it, baby. Like, what in the world is that? And obey. So it's a very, like, there's a lot of, like, contradictory messages here.
Yeah.
For women.
Well, and right before this, it talks about this is where you get the authority. You know, it starts off with wives, accept the authority of your husbands. It says, wives, in the same way, accept the authorities of your husband, so that even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won over without a word by their wives' conducts when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. I mean, we see this.
Yeah, so Paul in one place says, if you're married to an unbeliever, you know, you can leave, but if you don't leave, it's good. Then you get this.
Yeah, which you're just supposed to accept the authority, which has gotten, this passage is one that has been twisted so much
Yes.
to keep women in
Yes.
abusive relationships
Yes.
and abusive marriages. And I don't know if you've seen that, if you saw that as a pastor, but I saw that. I have seen that with people. And what's interesting is that this is a later letter.
Yes.
This is a later letter. And so part of what I look at when I see this is that you're seeing the followers of Jesus who are now being called Christians. They are dealing with the cultural, the cultural context that they're in. People are thinking that they are weird, that they are strange. Part of the problem is that women had a lot of leadership roles in the earliest Christian movement, and there were leaders and apostles who were women.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an equality there. Paul basically was like, if we are in Christ, then we are equal. And so he also was pretty much like, there can't be slaves in the Christian community, basically.
Right.
So there were all kinds of issues that were coming up because the Christians were doing things differently than the culture around. And part of what I think is happening here in 1 Peter, not that it excuses it, is that they're trying to accommodate to that larger cultural context because people think they're weird. They're not acting
Right.
they're not acting, their marriages, their families, their households were not conforming to the cultural norm at the time.
Right, which keeps people from reimagining what marriage could look like.
Yeah.
Because even today, we'll go back to these scriptures. And yes, I have sat many times with women who really should get out of their marriage. And I'll be straight up, I told them, yeah, leave, put your foot down. This is not okay. And I remember one woman finally doing it. And the power that she felt in that moment to say, I am worthy and worth it to not be treated like this,
Yeah.
only to then, because you know what the man does, oh, I'm sorry, I'll be okay, I'll be better now, blah, 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 moves right back in. And then she tells me she's going to another church now, and they told her that she needed to submit to him. And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. And I kept trying to, not just for her, obviously, but I think at this point, there are so many women that are just taught that you just need to be quiet and submit, that's they consider themselves a doormat then, and they don't see that they're worth any love, if you will, and whatever scraps that they do get from their husband, they just can live on that forever. I kept trying to appeal to her as a mother. I said, look at the precedent you are setting for your two daughters and your son.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, your son's not going to look for anything. He's going to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it worked in his mind. But the daughters, is this what you want?
Right.
For your daughters? And it's taken me years to really flip my parents' divorce on its head and realize what my mother did in standing up to the traditions that she had been raised in and breaking it and saying, I am not going to live like this, really allowed me to make better choices. Granted, yes, I still went back to the church. Yes, but also with her kind of filter in the back of my mind to see, wait, that's not okay. That's not okay. So I could now stand in front of the church and say, can we not do this anymore to women? How about if a man and a woman both go to Bible college and they both graduate and they both get degrees? How about we call them reverends instead of Reverend and Mrs.? There's a thought. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I went in there and yes, I was told I was angry and this and that. And it was more of a, I'm not angry. I'm just like, do you not see this?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And it's a little bit about the same kind of a thing. You know, Paul is like saying, just don't get married, which made everybody kind of say, oh, he's weird. And then you have his followers like Thecla and all of these people also listening, and now they're labeled as weird, and so we don't want to be labeled as weird and rock the boat, so let's go back to what is more comfortable for everybody else, i.e. the men in charge.
Right. Because this is the same, First Peter is the same book that tells slaves to accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but those who are harsh.
Right. Which was used for how many years?
I mean, it's
Yes.
it's awful. It's horrifying. So yeah, there's pieces of this book that are moving, First Peter, but then there are pieces that are horrifying in the consequences that they have had in the lived experiences of people and in their bodies as they endured enslavement or marriages that were abusive. So, you know, again, I can never separate out the consequences of what has happened because people read these texts in a certain way and the consequences in people's real lives. I look at that and I just say, to me, this is not scripture. That's
Right.
not, that is
Yeah.
not a word of hope. That is not a word of life
Right.
here. That is absolutely not. So
Dana Hicks, the author of The Knot, talks about form over function and uses the words of Jesus when Jesus is talking about the Sabbath. And, you know, people are all upset because they broke a rule. And Jesus has to explain to them, listen to me, the Sabbath was made for you. You are not made for the Sabbath. And I know I'm not Jesus, but I used to tell people this when I worked in the cookware store because people would say, how do I get I just want a beautiful oven and I need to get it clean and it's all scratched and I don't want it just scratched. And I would always say, yeah, I'm of the mindset that the oven works for me. I don't work for the oven. So I'm not going to worry about like if it's scratched. If it's scratched, that means that was one hell of a dinner that I made that one night.
Right.
And look at what of a mess I made. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But that's kind of the thing. People want everything so pristine and perfect looking, even though they may have had it for years.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay, but that means you work for that thing and all the time and the energy and the money and the elbow grease just to keep it clean.
right.
And now you're working for an oven.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of a thing that when you take a look at some of these marriage things, you know, Jesus really was, some people say, or at least this author really believes that the more that you put all of these rules into a marriage, then you're working for the marriage and the marriage is not working for you. And really being cognizant of that. Like if you are a woman staying in an abusive marriage, you know, just because the church has told you to, well, then what is the point of marriage?
Yeah.
Is it bringing you joy? Is it bringing you companionship? Is it bringing you that list of things that you hoped you would have?
Right.
Granted, I don't think that a marriage can do the whole like, oh, you complete me thing like Jerry Maguire, but there are things in my marriage that I really do want, you know, and I know that my husband can provide that. Can he do all of it? No. That's why I have girlfriends. That's why I have other people. You know what I mean? And to see the marriage as part of something greater
Yeah.
instead of the one thing that you must protect against all odds,
Yeah.
you know?
And I think the other thing too is that people were concerned about Jesus breaking the rules of the Sabbath, but he did break the rules of the Sabbath.
Exactly.
When people were hungry, he fed them. And so I think that there is a precedent there then for saying that there are potentially situations where someone is being harmed, and leaving the marriage is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Jesus was not legalistic
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that some of the other, there's, Pharisees get a bad rap in the Gospels. They're like the bad guys a lot of times. You know what I mean? And we can unpack the role of the Pharisees in the Gospels another time. But it's hard to know if it totally reflects reality or not. But they do get a bad rap. They're considered legalistic and all this. And Jesus is documented in the Gospels as making choices not to be legalistic about certain things. So he forgives, the woman who's brought before him, accused of adultery, and, they want to stone her and all this. And he says, let those of you without sin cast the first stone. And then they all kind of walk away, So I do think that there is precedent for Jesus responding to the lived experiences of people in a different way than I think the church has allowed us to live as far as these teachings about divorce. So,
thanks for tuning in. Up next, will the rejects keep, rethink, or reject today's topic? Stay with us.
So what do you want to keep, rethink, or reject about the biblical understanding of divorce?
Well, I think I just want to reject the shame and the guilt that many people have. I want to reject the idea that there's only one way that God really approves of divorce. So, and that's if, your spouse has an affair. I think that the marriage ideals need to be discussed. And I do think that rejecting the idea that people are just locked in and that's just the way it is definitely, which I don't know if that's divorce or marriage, but yeah, I guess just rejecting the idea that divorce is just evil and bad. What do I want to keep? Divorce, in case somebody needs it. So I don't know how does that work? And I guess just rethinking why people choose to have divorces and allowing each person to say, this is what I need from life. Therefore, this marriage is not serving me. And I feel like I'm okay to get a divorce if this is not serving me and what I want in life, and being okay with that.
Yeah. I think what I'm rejecting is the legalism about the biblical ideas about divorce. Because, there's laws about being able to divorce in certain circumstances that we find in the Bible. Jesus spoke out very strongly against divorce. And those things, can all be true. I think for me, what I'm rejecting is the idea that just because Jesus said this about divorce means that somebody has to stay in a marriage.
Yes.
Especially if it's an abusive marriage for a man or a woman. Either side could be on the receiving end of terrible abuse. And, and if there's kids involved, then they're experiencing that. And that is not healthy for anyone. And, ideally, is it great if people can get married and stay married? That's great. It's not how it works out in real life a lot of times. And so often I've seen when people have actually divorced, they're happier. Their kids are functioning better. It's not that it's easy. You've talked a lot about the effects of the divorce on your life. And, however, it's how much worse could it have been if your parents had stayed married all those years, and what might have happened through all of that, that kind of harm that they could have done to each other. So I think it's a really mixed bag. And I just think that we have to we can look at the Bible and say, okay, these are the things that the Bible says, and then we get to make our own decisions about what we're actually going to do in our own lives in prayerful discernment, and so I reject the idea that divorce is always bad. I just don't think that's true. I do think I have seen cases where divorce is the best option.
Amen.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's a lot in this understanding, the biblical understanding of divorce, the biblical understanding of marriage. There's a lot here, and it's fraught. It's fraught. So, as always, we would love to hear your thoughts. What have you learned about divorce in your own journey as in various faith traditions? Is divorce okay? Is it not? What do you think about it? Your thoughts about the episode? Like, follow, share, subscribe, and we look forward to catching up with you next time.